thinking about atheism and a leap of faith that we're going to suggest that all atheists need to make. Now, before we get into that, it's probably important that we define what an atheist or who an atheist is. Someone who doesn't believe in a God. So Wikipedia has this as the definition. It says atheism in the broadest sense is an absence of belief in the existence of deities or a God. Less broadly, atheism is a rejection of the belief that any deities exist. In an even narrower sense, atheism is specifically the position that there are no deities. So a bit of a range there, but essentially it's the belief that there is no God. Now, that's slightly different to an agnostic. An agnostic would say that he or she doesn't know if there's a God or not, sort of leaving open that as a possibility. Now, of the roughly 7.5 billion people on this planet, it's thought that somewhere between 1 to 1.5 billion people would put themselves into the category of the atheist. And certainly a number of my work colleagues that I work with at the moment and I've worked with over the years would put themselves into that category. Now, most atheists I've come across, they simply accept the position of the atheist that there is no God because they like the idea. Okay, others that I've come across, I would suggest, are very staunch atheists, and they sort of defend their position very vigorously, and they do that by using science as the backstop for their arguments. So atheists will often be very firm in their worldview. They think that their ideas are right, very dismissive of ideas of belief, for example. And this firmness of conviction, from their perspective, we would suggest is based on this scientific method. So let's remind ourselves what the scientific method is, because the scientific method, as you can see on the screen, it's something that can be observed. That from that, a hypothesis is created. There's then a testing of that hypothesis. You observe it again, and then there's the conclusions that you can draw from it. So it's a rigorous process that is there to test whether something that's believed is correct or not. And if something doesn't meet these standards of the scientific method, then it doesn't. It's not part of that sort of thinking, as it were, or that's how the argument goes. So what we're going to have a think about this afternoon is that we're going to test whether these ideas, or some of the ideas of the atheist, meet this test or not, or whether a leap of faith is required. So an atheist, in accepting their worldview, they must answer some very challenging questions. And we're going to look at 3 specific areas this afternoon. The first section's the slightly longer section. The other 2 are a little bit shorter if you're worried that we're running out of time as we go through. But the first one we're going to have a think about is this. It's how did we get here? Because how is life on this planet possible? And how indeed did the universe come into existence? Because if you don't believe in God, or if you don't believe in an intelligent designer, you need to explain how space, time, and matter, which makes up everything around us, how did that start in the first place? What was the origin of the universe? And then you need to answer, how did life start on this planet? You know, what was the catalyst that brought about the things that we see around us? And both of these things are incredible and they need explaining. So we're going to start with the first one, the origin of the universe, and think about the very big things in life. And then we're going to drill it down and have a bit of a think about some of the very small things as well. So we're going to start off by thinking about stars just for a moment. And our closest star is, of course, the sun. The Earth orbits around the sun, and the sun is an incredible body, and it is the largest object in our solar system. It's very big. It has a diameter of some 865,000 miles, and it's very, very hot. So at its core, the temperature is thought to be some 15 million degrees centigrade. At its surface, 5,500 degrees C. The corona, which is above the surface, gets hotter. We don't quite know exactly why that's the case, but some 2 million degrees C. And it would take around 1.3 million Earths to fill the volume of the sun. Now, in 1 second, this massive body gives off enough energy for all of man's needs for 500,000 years. That's quite incredible, that, isn't it? So when we talk about an energy crisis on the Earth, right, there isn't an energy crisis. We're just not very good at capturing that energy from the sun. And this body is so massive that it's thought that there's enough energy in the sun to continue burning, scientists say, for at least 5 billion years. So that's a very long time, isn't it? So the sun is an incredibly powerful body. But the sun is a star, and it's thought that the sun isn't the largest star or the smallest star. It's a pretty average star. But the sun and the solar system that we're in forms part of a galaxy that we're in. Can any of the young people tell me the name of the galaxy that we're in? Yeah. The Milky Way. Yeah, well done. Yeah, the Milky Way. And there's the Milky Way. Now, you won't be able to see it down there, but that says you are here. Okay, so if you're wondering where we are in the Milky Way, that's where they think we are. The Milky Way is massive. From one side of the Milky Way to the other, the distance is between 100,000 and 120,000 light years across. Now, if you're anything like me, that doesn't really mean very much. But let's just think about that just for a moment. In 1 second, light can go round this Earth 7 times. 1 second, 7 times light can go round this Earth. And if you could travel that fast, which we can't, but if you could go that fast, it would take you 100,000 years to get from one side of the Milky Way to the other. That's how huge it is. Now, the Milky Way is full of stars, as we say, some bigger than our sun, some smaller. It's thought there's between 200 and 400 billion stars in the Milky Way. Now, if you could count one star every second, it would take you 6,341 years to count all the stars in the Milky Way. It's a huge number, isn't it? That's massive. And the Bible tells us that not only did God create the stars, but he named them as well. But the Milky Way is only a very small part of the story, because the Milky Way is a galaxy. We find that there are many galaxies in our universe. And this was some pictures that the Hubble telescope took a few years ago of some of the galaxies that's out there in the universe. And it's estimated that there's at least 200 billion or 2 trillion galaxies in the universe. And that means that some of those galaxies have more stars in the Milky Way, some are less. So it's thought that the total number of stars is that number there, roughly. That's a guesstimate. Nobody's counted them. But that's 10 with 21 zeros after it. I think it's called a septillion. And that is a crazy number. That's a very, very large number that we all have difficulty comprehending. So we're going to do a little mind puzzle just for a moment. I want you to think about grains of sand. So I've brought some sand with me. This was sand that was in our garden, actually. Somebody said I should have brought some from Langwynadel from our camp, but I don't have any from Langwynadel. So there's some sand. So I want you to think about sand. And I'm sure we've all been on the beach and we've all made a sandcastle on the beach. Now, a small sandcastle is thought to have about 1 billion grains of sand. Again, I haven't counted it. I don't know exactly. But about 1 billion grains of sand in a small sandcastle. Now, I want you to think about sitting on a beach. You've just made your sandcastle. And I want you to think about all the grains of sand on the beautiful sandy beach that you're sitting on. Imagine you're in North Wales or something like that. And then I want you to think about all the grains of sand on all the beaches in the UK. And then I want you to think about all the grains of sand on all the beaches in all the world. And then I want you to add into that all the grains of sand that are in all the deserts of the world. And I want you to ask yourself the question, are there more grains of sand on the earth, or are there more stars in the universe? So if you think there are more grains of sand on the earth than stars in the universe, put your hand up. More grains of sand than stars. If you think there's more stars than grains of sand, put your hand up. I think that one just about has the majority. A bit of a split call on that one. But yeah, it's thought, again, nobody's checked this, but it's thought there are more stars in the universe than grains of sand on the earth. And that's crazy, isn't it? When we think of how powerful the sun is and how many of them there are, that's absolutely mind-blowing. And we also find when we look out into the universe that not only is its size incredible, but we also have a very finely tuned universe. The scientists talk about Goldilocks conditions. So scientists have worked out the forces of nature and they've done measurements on it. And it's found that it's just the right strength to allow the universe to exist. So for example, the force of gravity, if it was a little bit stronger, it would pull all the stars back in on itself. But if it's not too weak to allow the motion of the orbits of the planets. And it's the margin of error of the force of gravity is very, very small indeed. And it's same with other forces, nuclear forces, electromagnetism and so forth. So these Goldilocks conditions, it's not too hot, not too cold, but just right. And scientists have often marveled how this is so. And back in the 1980s, an astrophysicist called Sir Fred Hoyle wrote a book which he entitled The Intelligent Universe. So he wasn't a believer in God, but he said there's these very unusual attributes that we see in the universe. And he said this, he said, the list of anthropic properties, apparent accidents of a non-biological nature, without which carbon-based and hence human life could not exist, is large and impressive. So how does the atheists say all this came about? Well, most would point to the theory of the Big Bang. And I'm going to play just a very short video where you'll see an attempt to explain what the Big Bang theory is. Oops.
Our first threshold is the Big Bang, which happened about 13.7 billion years ago and led to the creation of the entire universe. We don't know much about the ingredients and the Goldilocks conditions that led to this first threshold because we just don't have much evidence. For example, what made the Big Bang possible? We don't know. Why did the Big Bang happen? We can only speculate. Was there even space and time before the Big Bang? We don't know that either. What we do know is that the Big Bang provided the raw materials for everything around us today. After the Big Bang, there was space, which was rapidly expanding, and there was time. There was also matter and energy. At first, the universe was so hot that you couldn't tell the difference between matter and energy. But within the first billionth of a second after the Big Bang, matter and energy separated. Then, energy took different forms, including gravity and electromagnetism. And matter appeared in the form of electrons and quarks soon linked up to form protons and neutrons. Why is this so important? Because nothing had turned into something. And that something contained everything needed to build an interesting universe, one that could eventually include you and me.
So the theory of the Big Bang then, that nothing comes to everything, or that from nothing becomes everything, that everything in this impossibly vast and massive universe with all those stars and all those planets came from nothing. Does that really make sense to you? Is that really believable? Well, that's the leap of faith that an atheist would make. And indeed, the conditions as to what might have caused the Big Bang in the first place and what was before the Big Bang, there's no explanation to that at all. There's no scientific explanation for it. It's just said that it happened. Again, that takes a massive leap of faith, we would suggest. Well, let's contrast with the Bible. The very start of the Bible, words that you'll know very well, Genesis 1 verse 1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So the Bible, right from the beginning, introduces God as the creator, an intelligent designer that caused these things to be made. And scientists tell us that the three components of everything that's around us is space, time, and matter. I don't know if you've thought about it, but we've got those three elements in the first verse of Genesis chapter 1. We've got in the beginning, well, that's time. God created the heavens, well, that's space, and the earth, and that is matter. Well, the atheist will say, well, that's all well and good, but I can't see God, I can't observe God, so therefore, how can I believe in him? Well, let's take the analogy of something that we're very familiar with, the analogy of a computer. I've got an Apple computer on the screen there as well. And we would all say that this computer has obviously been designed and it's been made, so probably made in China. So we would all agree that the computer has a designer. Now, if you were to take this laptop apart and look inside it, you wouldn't find, and please nobody do that, but you wouldn't find the engineer, you wouldn't find the person that made this laptop inside the laptop. By very definition, they are outside of it because they've made it. And we would suggest that God is like that God as the creator is therefore outside of space, time, and matter. He's introduced to us in the scriptures as a spirit being. We can't observe God directly in the universe. But what we can do is that we can see what God has made, and that gives us confidence that he has made it, that there is a creator and that there is a designer. Can you come with me, please, to Romans chapter 1? Because this is explained for us in the Bible. Romans chapter 1. Put the passage up on the screen as well. So verse 20, Romans chapter 1 says, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." So God has made the things that we see around us. The evidence of God is there, but we don't directly see him. It's the evidence of the creation that gives us confidence in the creator, is what we're being told there. So thought about the very big things. Let's have a look at, think about some of the small things, and let's try and think about that other question, which is, how did life start on this planet? Because planet Earth is teeming with life. As far as we know, it's the only planet with life on it. And the complexity of life on this planet is incredible. And the pinnacle of that complexity is each human being. And you are all incredible. You won't hear that very often, but you are all absolutely amazing, from the way that you can walk and run, processing power of your brains, the ability to see and hear, noses to smell, and so on. But what is it that constitutes you and me? What are we made of? Well, at the very base level, we're made from the dust of the ground, and that's what the Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 1. At the atomic level, we're carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and a few other elements that are essential for life. But the real building blocks for life is the cell. Now, in the human body, in a grown man, it's estimated that there are around 30 trillion cells in the human body. And that itself is astonishing when we consider that when we were conceived, we came from just one cell. And that cell has multiplied and multiplied and multiplied until who you are today. And the cell is incredibly complicated. It's often referred to as the simple cell, but it's anything but simple. And we could spend hours, couldn't we, thinking about DNA and the different things that are in the cell and so on and so forth. But we're not going to do that now. We're going to take a step back from that. And we're going to have a think about what are the key components of a cell. And one of the main constituents of a cell is the protein. And there's millions of proteins that go into a cell. A yeast cell, that's a very simple cell, has some 42 million proteins in it. Okay, so let's have a think about proteins. Now, proteins are made up of amino acids. So I want you to imagine, so here's our protein molecule. So just imagine each of these little circles, that these are amino acids. This isn't a very accurate one. I've just sort of cobbled this together, but just to give you a bit of an idea. And amino acids, there are 20 different types of amino acids that can go into a protein. And a protein molecule has between 150 and 500 amino acids all linked together to make the protein. So all of these different colours, if you imagine there was 20 different types of those, there's not as many of that here. And there's at least 150. So again, this is too small. But if there's at least 150 all linked together in the right order, then we would be some way to having a protein molecule. Now, here's the thing, and this is really important. Those amino acids, they have to be in exactly the right order. If they're in the wrong order, then you don't get a protein molecule. And evolutionists say, well, these amino acids, they naturally form in nature. And they say that they randomly came together to create a protein billions of years ago. And that protein then joins with other proteins, and then eventually you get your cell. Well, let's think about that from the perspective of the probability of that happening. I brought with me my dice, 6-sided dice. Now, young people, if I roll the dice, what's the chances, what's the probability of me getting a 6? 1 in 6, I got a 5. No good. What's the probability of me rolling the dice twice and getting a 6? Yeah? Nope. 1 in 36, that's right. Yeah, you multiply it together. So what's the probability of me getting 3 6s in a row? No. And you've listened to this before. 3 times 1 in 216, okay? You kind of get the idea. Now, what's the chances of me getting this dice and rolling a 6 50 times in a row? Well, it's that number there. It's a number with 33 digits after it. Now, that's considerably more than all the stars in the universe. Now, here's our problem. You see, creating a protein molecule from these amino acids, remember we said there were 20 different types of amino acids? It's a bit like having a 20-sided dice, and to create the simplest of protein molecules, you need 150 amino acids in exactly the right order. So it's a bit like rolling a 20-sided dice and getting a 6 150 times over. Now, the odds of that happening is 1 in 10 to the 164. Now, that is a massive, massive number. In fact, it's estimated in the whole universe that are only 10 to the 82 atoms. Okay, so it's a much larger number than all the atoms in the universe. And that's just to create one protein. And there are millions of proteins in a cell. And we're nowhere near thinking about how DNA might come about, or all the different types of cell, or how the cells might work together to create a life or an eye or whatever it might be. You see, if we, hands up if anybody plays the lottery. Anybody play the lottery here? No? Okay. Good. The odds of winning the lottery in the UK is 1 in 45 million. Now, if somebody wins it one week, you should congratulate them and say, well done, you've won the lottery. Now, if that same person wins the lottery the second week, hang on a minute, that's a bit strange, isn't it? That's an unusual, very unusual thing to happen. if somebody wins the lottery a third week in the row, third consecutive week, you'd think something was up, wouldn't you? You'd think something was wrong, that they're fixing and playing or cheating the system. Well, the odds of winning the lottery 25 times in a row is 1 in 10 to the 153. Now, that's smaller odds than making a pro team. You see, we're starting to see the issue here. You see, if we saw somebody win the lottery 25 times in a row, we would certainly know that they were fixing the system, that someone was in control of that process. And so that's the same with the creation of a molecule, isn't it? Someone's controlling it. They have to be controlling it to get those sort of odds. It's not something that can happen by random chance. And serious atheists and believers in the Big Bang, believers in evolutionary biology, they recognize the problems of this. They know how statistically remote the odds are to make it mathematically impossible. And so they have these theories that try and get around this problem. And the latest theory is that of the multiverse theory. Now, the multiverse theory goes like this. It says that there are an infinite number of other universes happening simultaneously to the one that we're living in. And within that infinite number of universes, every possibility within each of those universes is being played out. And so the conclusion of that is that if you have an infinite number of universes, that one of them has to produce life, which is the one that we are in. Now, that's a crazy theory. You know, it's completely untestable. It's completely unscientific because you can't observe it. You know, you can't prove it. But people are believing in this. And that, in my opinion, is a huge leap of faith. Could you come with me, please, to the Psalms, to Psalm 139? Psalm 139, and we're just going to have a look at one verse. This is what the Bible tells us about the Creator and all the things that have been made. Psalm 139, verse 14 says, I will praise thee, speaking of God as the Creator, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. And when we look at life, when we look at the universe, we can see that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. But there's another aspect to this verse that we'd like to just think about now, because it goes on to say, and that my soul knoweth right well. So here is another challenge to an atheist, and it's this: what about the deeper things of life? What do I mean by that? Well, the atheist who believes in the process of evolution, the process of survival of the fittest by natural selection over billions of years, the atheist would say that we are a product of the chemical and biological influences over that time. Now, I'm going to call these things gifts, but there are things that we're able to do, things that we're able to comprehend, that it's very difficult for chemistry or biology to explain. And what do I mean by that? Well, things like consciousness and thought. You know, when did you become a conscious being if we've evolved over those billions of years, able to think and theorize, to compute and to work things out, rather than just reacting automatically to your surroundings? You know, the human brain is one of the most complicated things that we know of. And our brains give us the ability to do things which are not easily explained. So the ability to appreciate beauty, the ability to play or to listen to music, for example, the ability to love and to experience emotions. You know, these are deep things that evolutionary biology, chemical processes don't explain how we've got them. How about how we treat each other? How do we know what is right and wrong? How can we be sure that we have a basis for morality, for the laws that this country has given us, if we've evolved and that we're a product of survival of the fittest. There's many things that we could think about in more detail here, but I'd like us just to give you just one example of where this evolutionary thinking can go very wrong from a moral perspective. Put your hands up if you've heard of eugenics. Anybody heard of eugenics? Some of you have, some of you haven't. Okay, well, in the early 20th century, the belief in eugenics became very popular. It was in the UK, it was also in America. And it was the idea that only the fittest survive, and therefore eugenics was a method of improving the human race to inherit the most desirable characteristics. And it was firmly based on Darwinian evolution. And in the 20th century, there were various programs to sterilize those that were physically impaired or mentally impaired. And the idea was that only the best genes would survive, and that would lead to an improvement of the human race. And it sounds pretty shocking to think about that now. And these ideas were taken on board by Germany, by the Nazis in Germany, in the build-up to the Second World War, and then during the Second World War, because they believed in the master race, the sort of pure Aryans, the 6 foot tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, physically able. I'm not sure how many Aryans we have here, maybe 1 or 2. And the Nazis tried to exterminate other races that they thought were inferior. And in particular, they tried to wipe out the Jews, who they blamed for most of the problems with the world. And of course, that led to the horrors of the Holocaust and the abhorrent evil of World War II. And that had its roots in this evolutionary way of thinking. You know, that's not a standard for morals. And thankfully, this view isn't accepted by most people in the world today. But you can see the dangers of it in terms of how things can go very wrong. See, the Bible, in contrast, gives us a very clear understanding as to where these things, these deeper things, come from. Can you come back with me, please, to Genesis chapter 1? How does the Bible explain this? Well, Genesis chapter 1, when we have the account of creation, Genesis 1 verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. So the Bible explains to us that mankind is made in the image of God. And that explains to us why we are able to experience emotions, why we can see things of beauty, that we're not just a body of biological makeup, of just chemicals. There's more to us than that. And Jesus, when speaking to the rich young ruler in Luke 18, why callest thou me good? Said Jesus to this man. None is good save one, that is God. And the Bible reveals to us that God's character is true and righteous, that our morality, our consciousness, all comes from God as our creator. And I suggest that the atheist has a difficulty in explaining these things. It takes a leap of faith for them to conclude on these matters. Okay, the last section that I want to look at before we sit down is, can there be hope for tomorrow? This is, again, a problem for the atheist. Can we go to the reading that we had read in Jeremiah chapter 17, please? In Jeremiah chapter 17, we have 2 contrasts. The first contrast is those that trust in man. Jeremiah 17, verse 5 says, thus saith the Lord, cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from the Lord. For he should be like the heath in the desert, and shall not see when good cometh, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness, in a salt land, and not inhabited. And an atheist, all he can do is put his trust in man. That's all he or she has. He doesn't accept that there's a higher being, no God to rely on. Some might believe in aliens or some foreign body that they might think might exist. But fundamentally, the trust and hope of an atheist is the aspiration of mankind. And when we think about that, it's rather depressing, because the whole evolutionary process is a process of death. It depends on passing your genes on to the next generation. And so an atheist will find it very difficult to believe in anything after death. So what is the hope of the atheist? Well, there might be the satisfaction that you live your best life, as it were. You hear that phrase quite a lot, don't you? To reproduce, to have children, to see them, their offspring, that they're the hope for the future. And then you die, and that's it. But just keep a marker in Jeremiah 17, and just come with me, please, to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, because within mankind, there is this thinking always that there is something more. And you often find this when you talk to these individuals. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11 says, "He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work of God, no one can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end." And where that says that also he set the world in their hearts, most other translations puts that he hath set eternity into man's heart. You see, there's something innate within mankind that's not satisfied with just simply living and then dying. There's something within man that wants to continue, that wants to go on. And there are a number of different avenues that atheists are trying to explore to sort of tackle this problem. Some of you might have come across this man, Brian Johnson. He's my age. We share the same surname. He made an awful lot of money selling a tech company some years ago. So he's very, very wealthy. And he's now decided to take on death. And he's decided that death is now optional. So you can choose not to die. And he does this by spending $2 million a year on his health, his fitness, and his diet. And he lives a very extreme regime, to say the least. And he thinks he can carry on living. And he thinks he's going to live for hundreds of years. Now, I won't go into all of his diet and fitness regime. It's quite interesting to read about. One of the things that he does is he takes blood transfusions from his 17-year-old son. So he has new young blood cells infused into his body, and apparently that's going to help him stay young. I did suggest that to my lads, and they weren't very keen on it, giving me their blood. But how's this gentleman going to get on? Well, we don't know. He might be able to extend his life a bit longer than the average. But is it really serious that you can make death optional? Doesn't that take a huge leap of faith? There's no scientific evidence for it. But what about another approach? Put your hands up if you've heard of cryogenics. Anybody heard of cryogenics? Yeah. So this is the idea that you can deep freeze bodies in the hope that science may one day advance to bring you back to life. And there's this company in America that does this called Alcor. They have now preserved, or they call it cryopreservation. I don't know if I'm sure I'm pronouncing that right. But they've preserved over 200 bodies in this hope that science may one day be able to bring you back to life. Now, there's no evidence of that. There's no proof of that, but people are putting their trust in these things. It's quite expensive to do this. For $200,000, you can have your whole body preserved. But don't worry, if you don't have enough money for that, $80,000 will get your head preserved. And if you want to take your pooch with you, there are options to have your pets frozen, and they hope that they'll bring the pets back to life as well. And there's no evidence that science is going to crack this problem, but people are believing in it. They're basing their future hope on these things. And this is a massive leap of faith. Well, let's conclude by looking at just a few passages from the Bible. Let's go to keep a marker in Jeremiah. Come with me to the Psalms, please, to Psalm 14. Psalm 14. verse 1 says, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, they have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek God." So this verse tells us about the fool saying in his heart, there is no God. And I think this is the core of the matter, isn't it? Because for the atheist to accept a God, which we're proposing is the logical conclusion to the things that we've looked at tonight. And when you accept there's a God, an intelligent designer, a creator, then it opens up a whole series of questions, doesn't it? It opens up the question as, why did God create me? What's his purpose with me? What does he want me to do? It's a responsibility question. And at the core, the atheist doesn't want to be responsible to a higher being. He wants to, or she wants to do whatever they want to do in their own life. So God looks at his creation and he looks at those that say there is no God, and God is not pleased with that. But if we do accept God, then there is a great blessing. Let's go back to our reading in Jeremiah chapter 17. Because we said that this was contrasted, this little reading that we had read. It's contrasted with the man who puts his trust in man, that's cursed, and he's like the heath in the desert. He's here today and then gone tomorrow, and then that's it. But look at verse 7, the contrast in Jeremiah 17. It says, "Blessed is the man who trusteth in the Lord, and in whose hope the Lord is. For he shall be as a tree planted by the waters, that spreadeth out her roots by the river, and shall not see when heat cometh, but her leaf shall be green, and shall not be careful in the year of drought, neither shall cease from yielding fruit." So the Bible makes it very clear that if we put our trust in God, if we accept what God says, then we'll be like a fruitful tree next to a river that will continue to live, that will go and prosper. And this position that the Bible offers for us gives us two things. It gives us comfort of mind now, knowing that God is a caring and a loving God, that he will always be with his people. But it also gives us hope for the future, that through God's Son, Jesus, we have the opportunity of everlasting life in God's kingdom. But what about faith? Because we've been thinking about the faith of the atheist, that some of the things that the atheist believes in, that needs a leap of faith. What about belief in God? Well, that also requires faith. Come with me, please, to our final passage, to Hebrews chapter 11. Because as we said earlier, whilst we see the evidence of God around us, we can't actually see God. And so we conclude with this verse in Hebrews chapter 11. Verse 6, the Bible tells us, "But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently see him." So the logical conclusion, based on the things that we've been looking at tonight, is that there is a God, but we've still got to have that faith. We've got to believe in him. And we've also got to believe that he's a rewarder to those that diligently seek after him. So tonight we've been thinking about a leap of faith that the atheist takes, but really the key leap of faith we need to take is the leap of faith, which is that belief in God. And if we do that and we accept his Son, the Lord Jesus, then we have the hope of everlasting life in God's kingdom here on earth. Thank you very much.